Hey, crew. So, obviously, a horrible thing just happened in my life and my family's life. My sister in law, unfortunately, just passed away. Um, and a lot of people are asking me if I'm okay. And first of all, I wanted to say yes. I'm not doing the fake Christian thing where I'm putting on a good front. My mind compartmentalizes things, especially big things like this, so that I can help the people around me and make sure all the ducks are in a row and things are taken care of. And then once that happens, I will inevitably in probably 2 weeks time feel if I even if I don't want to, but once everything is in order, I can open myself up to the feeling side of things and really grieve these things, and that's stuff I've worked on with my therapist, and so I just wanted people to know I'm good. There's a lot of people that have reached out to me saying that they're here for me, and I will definitely be taking a lot of people up on their offers to talk, to work things out, to hang out when I'm in that feeling process. But this idea of death is one that we're all going to have to go through. We all have to grieve. We all experience loss, and it's a very tough conversation to have at the church. You'll have a lot of people with a lot of different opinions and a lot of theology thrown in there. And it comes with a lot of questions and worry and fear and panic and regret. So I wanted to go through some of the bigger questions talking about grief, because often the church doesn't talk about loss or death or grief unless it's at a funeral or somebody is like on their deathbed and we really need to talk about it. But ultimately, people try to avoid the topic of death. Um, so there's a lot of big questions like, does God plan when we die? The idea of fate. Why do good people die? Is it okay to grieve? How do I grieve? And then there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of feeling of regret, feeling responsible, feeling guilty, feeling like our last words were shallow or hollow or mean, and so there's a lot of regret. And I want to talk about all of these things very briefly. Obviously, this isn't going to be a very extensive deep dive into grief, but just a basic idea of, first of all, saying it's okay to grieve, and it's okay to grieve in whatever way you have to grieve, um, and working through it and working through some of these tough questions. So the big one is, does God plan when we die? We like to think of God and this idea of fate in a way where God says, well, Matt's going to die in a car accident this year, and so he puts it in a safe, he locks it away, and now I have no choice. I have no options. I'm going to die in that way because God decided. God chose that I'm going to die that way. That's not how God operates. Um, so theologically, that's just not sound. God knows the day I'm going to die. He knows how I'm going to die. He knows all the events leading up to that death because he sees all of time. He sees all of the past. He sees the future, and he sees it all not in the way we do, in a very linear way, past, present, future. He sees it all at once. And so, yes, he knows when I'm going to die. He knows how I'm going to die. But it's not as if he has said, well, Matt has to die that way. Um, Ultimately, death is the result of, death itself, the idea of a human being dying, passing away, body decaying, was not in God's original plan. God's original plan is that humans were going to live with him in the Garden of Eden and on earth and take care of the earth and walk hand in hand with him forever, for eternity. And we chose differently. We said, actually, I kind of want to be like God, which is what Satan wanted as well. Actually, I want to know good and evil. I want to make those choices on my own. I want to be able to say no to some of God's plans. And so we introduce sin into the world. We humans introduce sin into the world, and it's resulted in a lot of things. A broken world, a broken Earth, a broken galaxy where there is now death, there is now pain, there is now suffering, there is now sin, there is now the ability to turn away from God's perfect plan. And when you have billions, trillions of human beings turning away from God's plan, making their own plans, trying to be creative, trying to take away the perfect plan, go their own route, go their own way. Well, now that creates a lot of strings, if you can imagine the way pathways that the universe could go, that people could go. Every choice we make has a million outcomes that we sometimes see and sometimes don't see. And God sees all of that, all of the many millions of little strings, when originally it was just one path. It was to walk with God hand in hand in perfect paradise. But now there's so many different strings, so many different ways we can go, so many um, ultimate choices we can make, and this results in a lot of bad things because ultimately God's plan is perfect and ours is very imperfect as human beings. Now, we romanticize fate in the day to day. It's very easy to romanticize fate. It's very easy to see fate as like this great, wonderful, romantic thing. I was meant for this job. I was meant for this path in life. I was meant for these hobbies. I was meant for these friends. I was meant to find this love of my life. This person that it was all in God's plan. It was all in God's hands. He wanted me to be with this one person. It's fate. And it's really easy to romanticize it until we lose somebody we love, until we lose that job, until we stumble, until we fall, until we get hurt. And then we think, well, okay, if God has everything in the palm of his hands, if it's all part of his plan, well, then he planned for that person to get cancer. He planned for my sister-in-law to get COVID and die. He planned for, that person to get hit by a car. But again, that's not how God operates. That's choices we make. That's choices other people make. And there's also this idea of a broken world where natural disaster happens, disease exists, all because we've deviated we've turned away from God, and it's unfortunate. And it was never meant to be a thing. It was never meant to be. It was never part of God's plan. And so no. The big blanket statement is no. God does not plan when you die and how you die. He knows when you die. He knows how you die, but he doesn't plan for it. There are exceptions because God knows everything. If a person is going to suffer and there is no life, there is no hope, because we always think there's no hope, but then somehow we stumble our way into finding new life, even when we're at our most desperate times. But yeah, for some people there is literally no hope, and God sees that there is no path, there is no string that leads them to hope, to healing, to living a good life. Well, then yeah, He might take them home. He might say, well, I don't want them to suffer, or their choices are going to make a lot of other people suffer, and there is no hope in all those many strings, and so He takes them home. But we ultimately don't know. And we think it's a very important question in the moment because we have to run through a lot of questions, part of the grieving process. We think it's important to know, well, is this God's plan? Was this God's plan that this person was to die at this time? Why would that be? Ultimately, we don't need to worry about that. We don't need to worry about that because if it is God's plan, well, then good. And if it isn't, well, then ultimately it was just a lot of choices that led to a very unfortunate thing. And I do say unfortunate. So death in the church is a weird topic for a lot of reasons, mainly because we think we have to be joyful, happy, hopeful all the time. And when a believer dies, they get to go to heaven. And that's a joyful thing. They get to be with God. They get to finally be in that perfect plan where they're walking hand in hand with Jesus for eternity. So there's this weird, well, we should celebrate. We should be happy that they're going home. But we still suffer. We still feel bad, and we almost feel guilty for feeling bad because they're in a better place, and we're stuck here. But Jesus came and he made death his enemy. He said death was bad. One of the only times Jesus cried in Scripture is when his friend passed away, when he died. He wept openly for this friend. Death is a very bad thing because it hurts us, because it's losing a piece of us. And so there is you don't have to have this idea that oh, well, we all have to be happy and joyful and death is a good thing and I should feel bad if I wish they were still here. Death is a very bad thing. There is that idea, though. Paul wrestled with this, where it would be better to be in heaven with Jesus. It just would be. That is the perfect plan. That is perfection. That is peace. That is joy. That is love. To be with him for eternity. And so he wrestled with, I would really like to be with you, Jesus, but I know you have a plan for me here on earth. I know that I'm going to touch the lives of others. And that's something McCann's testimony mentioned last night, where the people around us, they're a big part of life, existence. When my brother passed, before that, I was really suicidal, and I thought it would be so much better if I was just dead because of all this suffering, all of this pain, all of this heartache. But then when he died, I realized how big of a loss it was, and I realized I couldn't do that to other people. And then my sister tried to kill herself, and I realized how, I'll use the word selfish. Sue me if that's offensive to you, but a selfish decision to kill yourself, because we survived, our brother's death because we were together, because we could grieve together, we could cry together. We don't have to be joyful all the time. That's what McCain was mentioning, is where he sees Jesus, he sees community as part of his plan, and it is. When we lose somebody, yes, we lose a piece of us, but we have so many around us that we can cling to, that we can go to. And that's why I say, when I'm in that feeling process, I am going to go to the Victors, the McCanns, the Oleas, the people that have reached out to me and said that they are here for me if I need to talk. I'm going to reach out to them because that is part of the process, because that is life, clinging to the living, grieving the dead, and we're going to get into grief here in a second. But ultimately, I am alive, and I'm going to go with the people who are still alive and mourn and be sad. I don't need to be joyful and grieve with them. It's part of the process. So why do good people die? Well, here's the unfortunate thing is all people die, right? That's what we've just been talking about. All people die. But we even look at Jesus came, he is God, but he became human. He became fully man, and he died. Jesus Christ himself died. All people die. All humans die. If Jesus couldn't avoid death, we would certainly not avoid death. All people die, good or bad. And if that confuses you, I can't get into it right now, but I would recommend reading, first of all, Proverbs. It talks about, good people, good things happen to, bad things, bad things happen to bad people, good things happen to good people. If you're wise, you're blessed. If you're foolish, you're cursed. But then the second book of wisdoms, there's three. The second book of wisdom is Ecclesiastes, often talked about, made to be this really depressing book, and it sounds like it for a while, because it talks about random chance, that life is a roll of the dice. If you're foolish, good things might happen to you. You might get lucky. If you're wise, bad things might happen to you. And ultimately, no matter who you are, good, evil, wise, foolish, a Christian, a non-Christian, you're going to die. So what's the point? So that's very depressing, right? But the message of Ecclesiastes is that it's still wise to cling to eternity. And Jesus offers that. Salvation gives us that. It's wise to be wise. It is wise to be good. It is wise to be loving. Not because you avoid death, not because you avoid bad things, but because ultimately doing these things is good. It feels good. It helps the world around you. We all die, but it's better to die a good person than a bad person. And it is better to die a believer and go to heaven than it is to die a non-believer and go to hell. Like these are things. And then Job, the third book of wisdom in the Bible. Job is this great guy, and God admits it. He says Job is great. He is a faithful follower, and Satan and him, they have some back and forth, and so God allows Satan to really terrorize Job's life, and all of Job's friends act like we do when people are grieving, and they say, well, maybe you did something wrong, maybe you messed up, maybe it was your choices, maybe it was fate, maybe it was this or that, all these questions that we have when we grieve. And so finally Job confronts God. He calls him out. He says, how could you do this to me? I was faithful to you, and you curse me like this. You take away my family, you take away my money, you take away my property. You take away everything, even my health. And God's response is really weird. He takes him on a tour of the universe. He shows him galaxies. He shows him the stars. He shows him the atoms. He shows him all these little strings that choices in our life make, that create, all these new pathways. He shows him these great beasts, and then he leaves. He dips. And it's a weird message, but the ultimate message is we can't comprehend every path in life, every choice we make and its effects, and their effects, all the ripples of life, all of life itself. We can't comprehend the stars and the atoms. We can't comprehend what God perfectly manages every single day because of our choices. Sometimes good things happen, sometimes bad things happen. You don't know why. Sometimes it's part of God's plan, and sometimes, I just make a choice. If I do something horrible right now, if I just start punching myself in the face, I'm going to hurt for it. We just make choices, and we don't always know why, and we don't always like the outcomes, but our choices have effects, and their effects have effects, and so on and so on. And so, why do good people die? Well, we all die, and ultimately it was never part of God's plan, but thankfully there's hope. There's hope in Jesus. Yes, we all die, but now that's not a bad thing. That's what that's what that idea in the church comes from, is that it doesn't have to be a bad thing. When I die, I don't have to be like, well, this is the worst thing ever. It's all over. I'm doomed. No, I get to be with Jesus forever. So it's a good thing now. So there is hope there. Now, okay. So we get into grief, and this will be very brief because I'm already at 16 minutes and I don't want this to be too much longer. Is it okay to grieve? Yes. How do I grieve? That's up to you. My knuckles are a little sliced up right now. I went out, I was hitting the heavy bag a little bit. Sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's shouting, sometimes it's tears, sometimes you just feel numb. Um, it's all part of the process, and you have to feel it, as I'm not currently doing, but will. You have to feel it, you have to let it in. But yes, it's okay to grieve, and how you grieve. Ultimately, they say you can grieve in whatever way you feel comfortable, and however you have to grieve, do it. Go to a rec room and smash a bunch of stuff. Sit silently in a dark room and cry. Go to friends. Um, there are bad ways to grieve, like getting super drunk or taking a bunch of drugs, obviously. Um, but when it comes to the emotions you feel, there's no wrong way to grieve. Um, Even shame. Shame is not a good thing, but when we grieve, we naturally will feel it, and it's okay. And you don't have to feel bad that you feel bad, or feel bad that you feel guilty. Um, Feeling responsible. Like, if I only warned them not to get in that car, they wouldn't have gotten that horrible accident. Or feeling guilty, or like your last words were shallow or mean. This is a natural part of the grieving process. Everyone who experiences loss will feel this. You're not crazy for feeling this regret, but ultimately this regret gets you nowhere. So I would warn you to feel it, to understand it, but to recognize, ultimately you are not the cause of somebody's death. Ultimately, your last words don't matter because your character, I'm sure, shows through. My last words to my sister-in-law were probably a joke. My last words to my brother was he had recommended me a movie, and I said, "Cool, I'll check it out," and then I never did. And so I started feeling bad, like I started actually feeling so guilty that I'd never watched this movie. I never told him my opinions on the movie, but ultimately, obviously, it doesn't matter if I saw the movie or not. Would it have changed things? And so you don't have to feel guilty. You don't have to feel ashamed. You know, uh, but it's also okay to feel those things. Like, I don't want you to feel guilty about feeling guilty, right? So ultimately, what I want to say is, you are alive. Presumably, if you're watching this, you are alive. So choose life. Um, Grieve. You don't have to make everything a life lesson. But if that's how you grieve, turn this into a life lesson. What can you learn from your grief, from your sorrow? But cling to the living. Don't cling to death. Grieve, mourn, say your goodbyes, remember all the good times, and it comes in waves. That's another big thing about grief. You can be good for a couple of years, and then year 3 hits, and boom, you're in tears, and then you're good again, and then 20 years from now, you're going to grieve. It just comes in waves. There's nothing you can do about it, but it's not as painful as it seems. It feels very healthy. There are still moments 3 years later where I am in absolute shambles about my brother, but it's not like a scary thing. It feels very healthy. So I don't want you to feel afraid or anxious that, oh, I'm going to feel this forever now. Um, it's a part of loving. It's a part of community, that this connection was so deep, so important to you that you're going to feel it for the rest of your life, and so that in some way they're still a part of you because of that grieving process. But ultimately, cling to the living and cling to the living God who had once died. Jesus himself died, but he is now alive. Cling to him, find eternal life. And yeah, reach out to people. Reach out to me. Let people know if you're hurting, if you feel this grieving, this guilt and this shame, and just have somebody there to listen.